Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to Talking Toughness, the podcast where we explore all things mental toughness, resilience, and positivity with expert academics and practitioners from around the globe, covering the worlds of work, education, sport, health, and anything else that comes to mind. So, this is hosted by myself, John Perry. I work at University of Limerick in Ireland, and Doug Straharczyk, who is the CEO of AQR International, based in the UK. Hi, Doug. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you? What's it like in sunny Limerick
It is
today?
sunny. It actually is sunny today, which is great. Especially because I'm based in my office here that has no windows but a skylight, which means
Right.
it's either really cold or really warm. I think it's some really good 1970s design, but yeah, lovely day in the west of Ireland, which is nice. The sun gleaming off the water as I came in.
Yeah. Well, it's really nice here too. And we've got a bank holiday weekend. So when we've recorded these podcasts, I have a bit of relaxation. So I'm looking forward to that.
Nice. Very good. Very good. Let's move on. Who do we have with us today, Doug?
Right. Well, we're really looking forward to today's session. It's a very special session. It's the inaugural session for the Talking Toughness podcast. So our guest today is Professor Peter Clough. So we can think of no one better to kick off the Talking Toughness series of podcasts. It might surprise some to learn that Peter has got many talents. One, he was an erstwhile drummer in a seminal punk rock band, the Abrasive Wheels, and he was a former semi-professional rugby league player. But we know him better as one of the major figures in the modern development of the mental toughness concept. He's the initiator of the now famous 4Cs model. So his background includes being a senior psychologist with the UK Royal Mail Service, and actually a period as a consultant with AQR in the 1990s. However, in around 2000, 2002, together with a colleague, Keith Earle, he developed the 4Cs model, which started a journey which really continues to this day. And it's about understanding a concept we've always known to be important for our performance and our well-being. And Peter's been involved in every step of that journey. And as you and I know, John, he's been our friend and colleague for a very long time. And you and I have had some fantastic discussions with him. There are few who can provide the kind of insights and observations that Peter can provide. So today we're delighted to share some of that with the listeners. So, Peter, how are you? And have I missed anything?
No, what a very nice introduction. Hello, both, and hello, everybody. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the questions. I'm looking forward to discussing some mental toughness aspects.
Brilliant.
I particularly like the bit where you introduced that it might surprise some people that Peter's a man of many talents. in fairness, I remember first hearing when Peter said that he was in a punk band, and I think I was surprised by that, and then especially when I heard that he did some ballroom dancing as well. So
not to mention the interest in railways. That's another topic for another podcast.
That is an eclectic list of hobbies.
But the thing is, because when I was an undergraduate 100 years ago, when you read people's papers and names, you do tend to see them in a one-dimensional way. I was surprised when I went to conferences and ended up playing five-a-side with people. Yeah, it does come as a surprise to most people that there's lives outside the air. Well, so I think surprising is okay.
Absolutely, it is. Yeah. So look, it is great to have you, and Peter as well was, of course, my PhD supervisor, which is where I first got to know you, and I'd say mentor along the way as well. So that's always very nice. So I suppose then thinking about the first questions, going back to the start, Doug explained there, Peter, that you'd absolutely be seen as a pioneer of our understanding of mental toughness. What initially engaged that interest in mental toughness for you?
Yeah, and I think like all good research, all good ideas at the starts of where the beginning is a personal interest. Because as Doug kindly said, I was a drummer in a band. I played semi-professional rugby, but it started with a semi-professional rugby really when I figured out I was very talented. I was quick, good hands, except I wasn't psychologically robust enough. People used to terrorise me as a 17-year-old with a ponytail standing out on the wing. So some great guerrilla guy standing opposite used to tell me what he was going to do to me, and I believed him. So it started mulling over as why some of the people I played rugby with, or in fact most of them, it just bounced right off them. They didn't care. Sledging didn't work at all. Whereas me, I started thinking. It got in my head. So that was a starting point. And then moving on to sort of the area of mental toughness, it's one of those things which is often discussed, often mentioned, and it just wasn't defined. So, the start of the whole process, when people started talking about mental toughness, I naively asked, well, what do you mean by mental toughness? And they just shrugged. So, that was a starting point. So, and I think what's important is in all research strands and all ideas, you start off with a personal interest and then build on it. The art is not to get locked up in a subjective experience, but to use that subjective experience as a point of departure.
Right, that's really interesting, Peter. You threw something out interesting in there. That when you use the term mental toughness, people often wonder what that is, or some people can even be hostile towards that term. One of the things that we come across is that some people will argue that mental toughness is just resilience in another name. What would you say about that?
Yeah, but it's the classic, in inverted commas, just, and it's like all psychological theories. When you're building on a previous foundation, things move forward. But are they completely new? Are they completely radical? Well, you'd hope not, because after 2,000 years, people should know some key things about human psyche. So when you talk about is it just resilience? I mean, what we've discovered about mental toughness over the years is it's about prospering under pressure. It's about not being scared of pressure. So it's not about survivability. It's about, I keep using the prospering word. It's about more than just adequate functioning. It's about being able to cope effectively. And actually, my starting point, a part of the starting point was some people are better under pressure. And we're getting away from this sort of black and white view that stress is bad, calmness is good, and a more subtle approach. So resilience is about surviving. Mental toughness is about prospering.
Yeah, I think that I'm always reminded when I was an undergraduate student. So I was studying some sports psychology, and you learnt like theories of arousal. Okay, and you did people might have come across Clark Hull's drive theory from 1943 and stuff like that, where the whole premise of that was the sense that it was based on an assumption that humans strive for homeostasis. So this stressor happens and we do everything we can to get back to homeostasis because that's where we're comfortable. But what you're suggesting there, Peter, is that that's not actually true, because when you look at things like sport and performing arts, none of those are inherently, they're not necessary in any way. People go out of the way to get involved in that stress. So is that an aspect of mental toughness then, that kind of being prepared to go and put yourself in the line of stress?
Yeah, and I think thinking about your question is quite often, I remember Hull in 1943, and that's still taught on undergraduate courses. Surely we've moved on. But it's that classic, what people say is the flight or fight response. And actually, I've rarely run away and I've rarely got into a fight. So actually, where we are is somewhere in the middle. It's not just, what do you do? Do you panic and run away? Do you get into a bit of fisticuffs? No, you function in a more complex way. So quite often, basically, if it's a very simple model, it's a very simple answer, and people. I'll borrow one of your quotes. The simple models, but there's not many simple people. So it's that's where we lie. So back to the initial question about where did it come from? When I was taught in an undergraduate in the 70s, 80s, it's still the same in the 90s and 2000s. The models are not weren't particularly sophisticated in how we deal with stress, and actually stress was demonized, whilst accepting that stress is part of life. And I always used to do a poll with my students. If you got who often wanted to be clinical psychologists, which is really, really exciting, and I pointed out, if you got the same money for shelf stacking in ASDA, and there's nothing wrong with that as a job, I have done that as a job, or being a clinical psychologist, what would you choose? And they all wanted to be clinical psychologists. Then you ask them, is that not more stressful? And the answer is yes. And then you leave them to ponder. They've just said in an earlier part of the session that stress is a bad thing. So let's think about it. So it's about trying to reflect the human condition rather than some animal model from the 19th century.
Brilliant. So you said earlier, Peter, that where we are today is an evolution of our learning about how people function over many, many years. What would you say were your major influences when you started the mental toughness journey?
I think the major influences were an unhappiness with the current models, the subjective experience. And we go back to the introduction. We go back to all psychologists, all psychological models have some sort of person involved who is a model, and then looking at slightly more advanced models, like hardiness, which were doing the same things. And a fourth element was, and it's been a problem with UK and Irish psychology for many years, is sometimes it's more reflective of American psychology, which is absolutely fine. I mean, but we're a different country, and I think what we've all discovered is the importance of diversity and understanding different countries' different views. So quite a lot of the models, in fact, nearly all the models I were taught were American models, and different country, different approach. So the inputs were an obvious gap, some personal experience, and then trying to operationalize something which would be useful. It's the classic. We can make things really, really complex. We can make things too simple. But what I was trying to do is get something in between, which was useful and then could actually make a difference. Just describing is fine, an academic sense, but I wanted something which had practical and practitioner implications.
And that's an incredibly challenging line to walk sometimes. I work in an academic context and I try and do some practice stuff, and there's often this gap between the two. So how can we kind of feed both elements? We want to understand the concept, understand people. So that's the kind of evidence base to it. But also, as you say, you want to operationalize it. You want it to be of use in the real world. And I think it's a fair criticism to say that there are probably many concepts out there in positive/pop psych that maybe fall one way or the other. There's lots of good stuff with an evidence base that nobody outside academia ever uses. And hey, we've all come across some of the stuff that does get used, but actually has very little evidence behind it. So how do you manage to ensure that what you're able to operationalize and make a difference in the real world is evidence-based but useful?
Yeah, good question. So I'll start with sort of two points, because how did I do? I met Doug. Doug came to my office and found me lurking in a darkened corner somewhere discussing these models, but I had no in those days, certainly academia had no desire to get outside of academia. We judge differently. Our promotions are based on different things. It's about papers and research. And one of the big problems is academic offices are full of research which never gets published because there was no other route for publishing it. Academic journals were the way forward, but there was no social media, no way out of it. So you need and Doug was pioneering in as being a bridge to say, why don't we put it out? And it hadn't occurred to me. Yeah, in the early 2000s, and nowadays, I know that it's now seen as a real positive in academia to have academics out in the media. It wasn't 20 years ago. You wouldn't see. So yeah, that's the key element. And the other element is getting out and talking to practitioners, talking to people who use the concept and being aware to change. The best advice, clearly, Everett is not a great PhD supervisor, unlike myself with you, John, but my PhD supervisor's best thing was, if you can't spell it, don't say it. And, when we go out and people, and there is a danger sometimes, there's a lot of pretentious terms. Mm. So, so it's a simple terms. So talking to people and then being willing to modify your views, because I think what most academics want is a debate. We've never said we were right. We put an idea forward and then we have a discussion. So, it is being able to be fairly fleet of foot, think about it, and always come back to, and when I'm supervising projects and PhDs, the question I always ask them is the key question is, so what? Yeah, you found something, and the point is, and in academia, sometimes it doesn't have to be a point, and that's fair enough. That's a different profession. But in the real world, there has to be an end product. There has to be a point of what you're doing. And it is really engaging in the outside community. So I started engaging in the outside community. Yeah, I worked as a postman for 5 years and came into academia late. So I always had a slightly different view of, I was more, and academia is real world. It's a job, but the criteria are different. But they were surprised by somebody who had, I was going to say a 9 to 5 job as a postman, a 3 a.m. to 12 p.m. job. So that was always driving the process. And I just couldn't see the point of doing psychology, which then didn't have an impact in society.
That's brilliant, Peter. Ben, thank you very much for that kind reference to me. But I remember those discussions very, very well. And they work both ways, because, to be honest, at that stage in my career, I'd been trained in psychology and human resource management by the companies that had employed me. And I didn't really question the ideas they were asking me to adopt. And it was when I started working with you that I began to kind of understand what evidence meant. And I slowly began to understand that a lot of the tools and techniques that I was using had no substance. They were faddist. And I think, unfortunately, the world that we operate in continues a little bit like that to this day, although we do see people waking up. And I was really interested to see that in summer, the BPS Journal put out a piece about faddism in people development. And they happened to notice that if somebody had done a TED talk, the world would suddenly pay attention to the idea, even if the idea had no substance to it at all. So we do tend to get attracted to attractive things, not necessarily to the substance. And I think that's been an important part of the journey that all three of us have been on, to try and get this idea that if you're going to do something with people, make sure that there is some evidence that it really, really works, that it doesn't just been made up in a kitchen somewhere. So one of the things that I'm interested in, Peter, is where do you think the concept is going to go? We've kind of worked at it for the last 30 years. And there have been times when I think, oh, that's it. We've developed 6 factors. We've developed 8 factors. But I think it's actually a never-ending journey. Where do you think it's going to go?
Well, I think, there's a number of elements. I think it's a matter of refining and securing the home base of the model and the questionnaires. So that's an element. That's that's the hard yards. That's the trogging in the back room, but that has to be done. Secondly, I think it's passing the ideas and concepts on to a new generation of people who have different views. I mean, one of the concerns is we don't want people to completely alter the model. It can be a starting point. People can build on these models and do their own thing. So, we have a new generation of researchers coming on board. So, I'm the old school. John's somewhere in the middle, and then there's other people who run with it. So, I think, my starting point in looking at the future is, one, I don't know, where's it going to go? Because people are going to take it in different directions than I would. But from my own directions, I think as we've grown into the concept, it started off as a sports concept perhaps, but has moved a long way from that, is the idea of diversity and equality are central to mental toughness. So it's those sort of areas, and cultural differences. So what we don't want to do is say everybody's the same or there's a right answer. It's a way of helping explain human behaviour and also helping people maximise the potential. So if you talk about maximising the potential, it ties in with a really classically defined a softer element. So it's come from a very hard base through to a more nuanced and softer base. So that would be the future. But also, we get some exciting queries, on a weekly basis with somebody who wants to bring it into a completely new area. So it will develop, but a lot of the hard work and a lot of hard work done by John is ensuring that what we've got is solid and remains solid and is updated. So it's those two elements of keeping it going, keeping the foundation go, and being open to new ideas and challenges.
I think it's a great point. Sort of being open, remaining open. One thing that strikes me as so strange is when psychometric tools, in particular, which is the operationalization of a construct, stay the same for 50 years. And you think, does that mean that we haven't learned anything new in this time? Because the way we're measuring it and the way that we're identifying where people are or trying to develop a profile on someone, surely if we're learning more, that should change, right?
It should, and I sound critical of some of the stress models in the past, but they were of their time and they were appropriate and allowed you to move forward. Mental toughness is of its time. Will people still be using it in the same way in 50 years? Perhaps not, but it will be mentioned and it'll have been the platform for a whole new raft. And that's how science is. It develops based on what you find, what you check. And we can't afford or don't want to be sensitive and overprotective. We feel it's got something to say, but somebody might come up with a stonking view of a stonking new model, which moves it forward. So in 100 years, it might still be mentioned. It's probably still going to be taught on undergraduate courses. It will be there, but there'll be a new world, a new world order on it, and that's how it should be. So I think what I'm proud of in our team is we protect what we say. We back it up with evidence. We get a bit miffed if people challenge it without good reason. But we're also open to other models, different approaches, and we're constantly inquiring and interested. So it will evolve. The model will evolve, and new models may well come in, completely different. Because mental toughness is, I've already made the point, different to what was before. So it'd be slightly arrogant to think 50 years' time other psychologists. But what excites me, I am getting old nowadays, is it's the starting point for these explorations. And that's exactly how it should be. For the next 20 years, I think it's solid, it's functional, it will do a really good job. But as society changes, it will evolve. It probably has relevance. But let's encourage new researchers to take the concept.
And if I can sort of keep going on that one, because you mentioned about sort of society evolving. Evolving doesn't always mean in positive ways. Of course, it can evolve positively or abnormally. But I suppose based on your experience over the past couple of decades and how you think society might be moving, how do you see mental toughness sitting in with those kind of societal changes? There's no doubt that things like connectivity has increased tremendously in the last couple of decades, and things like productivity, like life is so rushed and everything these days. Yeah, on the flip side, most of us that are fortunate have a sort of fairly comfortable existence in terms of we're not struggling for a roof over our head or food and things. So how do you see that relationship between mental toughness, our understanding of it, and societal changes?
And I think, people who are more mentally tough, or the mental toughness concept in itself, helps people understand that things change. I mean, things change on the surface. There's some fundamental changes, but yeah, human beings are human beings. I suspect, because I'm now a tour guide for Scarborough Castle and talk about the English Civil War. Yeah, I'm really up to date for 1641 and all that. Poor people. I'm sure I could have had a discussion about mental toughness as they're lobbing 12.5 kilogram cannonballs at them. There might have been a different view. So, but the way we operate changes. But I think interesting when you talk about society changes, clearly it's faster. Clearly there's social media and there's all the stuff about trying to fit in, physical appearance, and we've done work on that. Yeah, diets. But there's always been sort of challenges. But as society changes, it sort of changes at different rates. So, give an example. I don't think sports has leapt forward. The sort of stuff I did in the 70s, I think it has moved forward, but it's still about winning and performing. And I think business has moved forward a lot in its approach about transformational leadership and teams. And I think education somewhere in the middle. So I think where mental toughness, if it has validity as a concept, and it does, it should be appropriate across different settings, across a diverse range of people, across different countries, and across timelines as well. But I go back. I can go backwards. You can't go forwards. It's more difficult. I think in 1641, I could have had a team talk about mental toughness when Hugh Cholmondeley was defending the castle against Oliver Cromwell. I think it probably is the least of their worries. But I think sometimes we forget the human condition's the same. Yeah, we're still humans, but put under different sort of pressures. And again, as a simple model, when people talk about social medias and the pressures of social medias, even somebody my age can't get themselves off Facebook. So we like it. So we're back to that starting point. Is it terrible? No. Does it have terrible elements? Yes. But we wouldn't do it if we didn't like it.